Welcome to Animal Attacks. Today, I'll go over the final moments of a mother unfolding in plain sight beside a shallow river channel. From a cobra on the N2 asphalt, where a driver exits his vehicle and approaches on foot into a fatal mistake, to a child falling into a suburban pond, where a rescue attempt pulls a supervisor into what's beneath the surface. Let's begin with the first case, where ordinary moments near the water turn into sudden tragedy. It was August 14, 2016, and the Boro River tributary moved silently through papyrus reeds beside an unlicensed campsite in Botswana's Okavango Delta. The water lay still in the early morning light, disturbed only where the bank met submerged roots. Marlene Voste was 41 years old and had spent years putting money aside from her job at a fabric distribution warehouse in Ghent for this trip. It wasn't something booked on a whim. She'd actually been saving for a long time so her family could go on a guided overland safari together. Marlene was the organized one in the family, the kind of person who liked routines and liked keeping things in order. While her husband, Dirk, took care of the travel plans, she was usually the one managing the day-to-day details. Their children, Faye aged 14 and Soren aged 9, traveled with them on a multi-day tour where Marlene was known for maintaining camp cleanliness and structure and was also dealing with persistent dust-related eye irritation. By the 5th day, the group was relocated from a booked campsite to an overflow site closer to the riverbank, one that lacked proper barriers and sat on deceptively flat ground that dropped into hidden channels. Earlier safety warnings about the water were not repeated after the move. I'm looking at how close that temporary setup sits to the water, and it already feels like everything's been moved just a little too near the edge. In this setting, Nile crocodiles commonly hold position in shallow reed-lined water, remaining fully submerged and nearly invisible in tannin-dark conditions where surface disturbance vanishes instantly and depth changes occur within a few steps. Adults of the species can reach 20 feet in length and exceed 1,500 pounds, making them the largest freshwater predator on the African continent and one of the heaviest reptiles on Earth. At dawn, before breakfast, witnesses reported that Marlene was seen near the riverbank, believed to have gone to rinse cookware after a weak camp water supply had led others to use the shoreline for washing, confusing safe collection points with the water's edge. The camp was dispersed at the time, with other members of her group away or nearby, but not immediately beside her. Investigators believe she was kneeling at or near the waterline when the attack occurred. Based on the position of disturbance and accounts from those who responded to sounds from the bank, a large Nile crocodile struck from the submerged reed line with immediate acceleration, pulling her into the shallow water at the bank. There was no visible warning beforehand reported by those who arrived moments later. What feels deceptive to me is how quickly the clear water turns completely unreadable the moment it starts moving. I don't even get a second of warning before the distance between her and the water disappears. Within seconds, the animal had moved her into a deeper channel near the shore. Attempts to intervene stopped at the shoreline due to speed and risk. The guide used a satellite phone to contact emergency services and park authorities, triggering coordination with ranger units and medical evacuation teams. The remote location and multiple communication handoffs caused delays in response. A response team arrived later that morning and conducted searches through river channels and submerged routes throughout the day. Marlene's remains were recovered approximately 2 days later downstream. Medical assessment concluded that death was consistent with drowning combined with severe crush and rotational injuries from a crocodile bite, including multiple fractures and extensive soft tissue trauma findings, entirely consistent with the full body rotational force the species applies once it has secured a grip. Loss of consciousness was considered rapid following submersion, though exact timing could not be determined with certainty. Wildlife officials later noted the crocodile's size and behavior were consistent with large territorial individuals in connected river systems, though its precise origin and movement history remained unconfirmed. The overflow campsite was later closed to use. The incident was recorded in internal reports and received limited local reporting, with no widespread intentional coverage. For the next case, we jump to a highway where stepping out of a truck turns routine traffic into something far less predictable. It was March 3rd, 2019, and the N2 southbound moved through KwaZulu-Natal the way it usually did on a Sunday morning. Steady, familiar, and briefly interrupted only when something forced attention. Obakeng Cesar was 33 years old and had worked for 6 years as a refrigerated freight driver for a logistics company based in Ladysmith. He hauled frozen fish between Durban and East London several times a month, a route he knew so well it rarely demanded full focus. What stands out in my mind is how long familiarity can stretch attention into autopilot without anyone realizing it. Dispatchers relied on him because he was consistent and uneventful on the road. He supported his mother Gertrude and his younger sister Bull on his income, had no public online presence, and carried a quiet familiarity with snakes from childhood in a rural area near Ladysmith, where he had handled non-venomous species without incident. The N2 near Maltualame runs close to dense coastal vegetation and the Maltualame River, where roadside embankments remain damp well into the day. A Mozambique spitting cobra, roughly 4.6 feet long, emerged from the grass onto the southbound lane after being disturbed by road vibration and stopped in the roadway in a loose-shaped posture. The species carries a level of medical significance that separates it from most venomous snakes found across the region. Its venom is cytotoxic. It destroys tissue at the cellular level, producing severe necrosis at the bite site and, without rapid treatment, systemic damage as it enters the bloodstream. The shaped posture in which the snake had stopped was not a resting position. It is the loaded configuration from which a cobra launches a strike, the body coiled into compression that releases forward in a fraction of a second. A minibus taxi swerved past as several vehicles slowed, and one pickup stopped at a distance while the cobra remained in the lane. Obakeng pulled his truck onto the shoulder ahead of the animal, stepped out alone, and walked toward it on foot without gloves or any tools. From a crouched position a few meters away, the snake appeared loosely coiled and relatively still, lacking the fully raised hood or obvious threat posture he associated with the defensive cobra, and he misidentified it as a harmless mole snake based on his past experience with similar looking species. My attention goes straight to how confidence built from familiarity can replace caution without feeling like a mistake in the moment. He closed the distance further and leaned in, extending his right hand to position it behind the head for control. As his fingers entered striking range, the snake reacted instantly, its body snapping forward from the S-curve in a rapid, direct strike that connected with the webbing between his thumb and index finger before he could withdraw. He withdrew immediately and returned to his truck, initially believing the injury was minor, but within minutes, intense burning pain spread through his hand with rapid swelling. He contacted his dispatcher first, then emergency services, while seated in the cab as symptoms worsened rapidly. A bystander who had stopped assisted him as his condition began deteriorating beyond localized pain. His skin flushed, his breathing became labored, and his blood pressure dropped in a pattern consistent with a severe systemic reaction. Whether driven by anaphylaxis, the volume of venom delivered, or a combination of both, his body was responding in a way that went well beyond the bite site. Emergency services arrived approximately 30 minutes after the call and provided supportive care. Definitive antivenom treatment is administered only in hospital settings and was not available on scene. He was transported toward higher level care in Durban, but his condition had deteriorated significantly before he reached advanced care. Obakeng Cesar was pronounced dead several hours later. Medical findings attributed death to severe systemic envenomation from a Mozambique spitting cobra, with death likely accelerated by an acute systemic reaction to the venom and the interval before hospital-level treatment could be administered. A brief notice appeared in regional print, and employer support was provided to his family. The snake was not recovered and retreated into nearby embankment vegetation along the Mutualome River. I thought I could read a snake the same way I read the road. Up next, we move into a single decision to leave the vehicle and collapse the safety buffer entirely. It was October 22nd, 2017, in the eastern boundary zone of the Masai Mara, where open grassland breaks into scattered acacia scrub and termite mounds under a clear, early morning sky. Rupert Kless was 29 years old, a hobbyist wildlife enthusiast from Rotterdam who had booked his first guided safari package to the Masai Mara through a budget tour operator. He had no professional background in wildlife photography or fieldwork, and the trip was his first time in East Africa. He had brought a consumer camera and had spent the first 2 days shooting from the vehicle with the group before separating from his guide on the third morning to explore independently, underestimating both the terrain and the risks. Over the previous day, he had spotted a female leopard with cubs near the boundary grasslands and decided to approach on foot for closer images, not fully appreciating the risk of a protective mother with cubs in open, low-visibility terrain. My thought here is how getting the better shot slowly starts overriding the original safety boundary without it ever feeling like a switch flips. At around 6:30 in the morning, after moving away from the vehicle, he worked his way into the grass toward the leopard's last position. When one cub moved suddenly nearby, the female oriented toward him instantly. He had no time to retreat before she closed the distance. Leopards are capable of reaching nearly 60 kilometers per hour in short bursts, and a defensive charge does not present itself as a gradual escalation. It is a committed movement executed at full speed with complete directional focus from the moment it begins. Among large predators in African wildlife, a female leopard with cubs is consistently identified as one of the most dangerous close-range encounters. Not because of unusual aggression, but because the threshold for a defensive charge compresses to almost nothing when offspring are proximate. She covered the open ground between them in seconds. The bite she delivered to his neck and upper chest was not incidental placement. Leopards, like all large felids, are biologically directed toward the neck and throat during an attack, targeting the anatomy most likely to incapacitate quickly. A single contact in that region is sufficient to sever major vascular structures or compromise the airway. She disengaged once the threat had been physically neutralized and returned to the cubs, consistent with a defensive rather than predatory sequence. The pattern of injuries and the fact that she did not remain reflected that distinction clearly. He remained on the ground for some time before managing to move. The neck and chest injuries were severe, with significant bleeding that he was unable to control. He had no field dressing. I'm struck by how much longer that distance feels when movement itself becomes limited. He reached the Land Cruiser after some time, pausing at the door before forcing it open. He managed to drive using the vehicle's automatic transmission and steering with difficulty as his condition worsened. He traveled several miles along the boundary track to the Sekenani Gate. He arrived later that morning in critical condition with substantial blood loss from neck and chest injuries and rapidly worsening signs of systemic shock. Medical assessment confirmed severe vascular and soft tissue injury to the neck and upper chest with blood loss that had not been controlled in the field. Despite initial stabilization attempts, his condition deteriorated over the following hours, and he later died after transfer to higher level care. The incident was not publicly detailed by those involved, and records indicate only limited external reporting. The leopard and her cubs were later observed in stable condition by local conservation monitors. Now we shift to a coastal rock platform in South Africa, where a stranded animal turns distance into a split-second trap. It was January 8th, 2015, at a quiet, rocky stretch of Perlemoen Bay, south of Hermanus, where flat coastal rock dropped into clear, ankle to knee-deep water over a hard seabed under a still summer tide, with no warning signs or posted advisories in the area. Calder Nienaber was 52 years old, a semi-retired plumber from Hermanus who had spent most of his life fixing things others could not or would not repair. He was physically large, broad-shouldered, and accustomed to working with his hands. With no formal background in marine activity, beyond occasional family visits to the coast with his wife Senmari and adult daughter Ren. He had seen sharks offshore before at a distance and treated them as part of the coastal environment rather than something separate from it, and was generally described by family as someone who would intervene directly if he believed something was wrong. Attention goes to how someone used to hands-on work can default to stepping in physically when something looks wrong. Two families were spread further along the beach when Ren noticed a broad-nosed seven-gill shark in about a foot of water over flat rock, a large adult. She would later describe it longer than she had expected to see that close to shore. It moved in short, unsteady bursts and repeatedly turned back on itself in the confined shallows where a rock shelf stretched far out to sea. The broad-nosed seven-gill belongs to one of the oldest surviving shark lineages, carrying 7 gill slits on each side, where nearly all modern shark species have 5. A structural feature that places it within a group that predates many familiar contemporary species by hundreds of millions of years. Adults regularly reach 9 to 10 feet in length and carry a muscular density that photographs at a distance consistently underrepresent. A recent combination of low tide and residual swell had left a section of the reef platform exposed, while still allowing wave wash to push water intermittently across it, creating a patchwork of shallow, disconnected pools and channels. In one of these isolated depressions, the shark had been left temporarily separated from deeper water, with each retreat attempt redirected by incoming surge and exposed rock edges that interrupted a clear path back to the channel. The result was a confined, unstable pocket of water where depth changed over short distances and the animal's movement was repeatedly constrained by shifting flow rather than open escape routes. Notice how within a few steps the depth goes from barely covering the rock to slightly deeper channels and then back again. As he tried to stay close and shift his position in knee-deep water, the shark thrashed more erratically in the tight shallows, its movement getting more unpredictable as it twisted in the confined space. When Calder shifted his stance, the shark's head swung back in a tight arc toward his arm. It bit down on the forearm, severing major vessels before pulling away and moving along the seabed towards slightly deeper water. Calder stumbled backward out of the surf, raising his arm instinctively as catastrophic bleeding began from the forearm wound. He crossed the wet rock and lowered himself into a seated position as his wife reached him and applied firm pressure using a towel, but the depth and location of the injury made the bleeding extremely difficult to control. Despite sustained compression, blood loss remained severe. Over the next several minutes, his condition deteriorated rapidly as he developed progressive signs of hypovolemic shock. He remained conscious initially, speaking in short, strained phrases, but became increasingly pale, weak, and less responsive as bleeding continued beyond what field compression could manage. Emergency crews arrived after accessing the site from the nearest drivable point, stabilized him on scene, and initiated resuscitation during transport to hospital. He was later declared dead from hemorrhagic shock, secondary to catastrophic blood loss caused by a shark bite that severed major vessels in the forearm, with blood loss exceeding what could be controlled before advanced medical treatment could be provided. In Me, there is a focus on how the same flat, open rock area that looks easy to stand on becomes difficult terrain for emergency movement and response access. The shark was later found deceased in the same shallow zone the following morning, likely due to prolonged stranding and stress in the confined rocky shallows. The incident received limited local notice. Clear water meant clear risk until the danger was already moving beneath it. Up next, we move into a suburban retention pond where a rescue stepped forward and an attack happened in the same instant. It was June 29th, 2020, in a suburban housing development in coastal South Carolina, built around a network of retention ponds where still summer air sat over murky water edged with cattails and clay banks shaped by constant maintenance work. Tremont Arias was 47 years old, the maintenance supervisor for the community. responsible for irrigation, landscaping, and pond systems he had managed for over a decade. He lived within the same development and was known for handling problems directly, often responding to issues before formal escalation. A nuisance alligator report had already been filed for the central pond weeks earlier, with no contractor yet dispatched due to statewide backlog. Sits with me is how isn't separate from the system here, he's physically inside the same environment he's expected to manage. American alligators are sit-and-wait predators that depend almost entirely on concealment and patience. In murky, vegetated water, the kind that fills retention ponds throughout coastal South Carolina, an adult alligator can hold a submerged position for extended periods with no surface indication of its presence, its sensory system calibrated to detect vibration and surface disturbance from a significant distance. At the edge of the neighborhood, a 6-year-old child slipped through a loose residential gate and moved along a muddy path toward the pond, then fell down a short slope into shallow water after losing her footing. Her mother called out from the yard as Tremont, working nearby on irrigation repairs, heard the shouting and moved immediately toward the pond, aware of both the child's position and the reported alligator presence in the water. He reached the bank within moments and stepped into the shallow edge without hesitation, wading toward the child through murky water that hid the drop into deeper water just a few feet away. By the time he reached her, she was already partially at the bank, having managed to pull herself partway up the slope but unable to get clear on her own, still in the water from the waist down. Witnesses reported that he was lifting her toward the bank when the alligator struck suddenly from beneath the waterline. According to those present, Tremont lost his grip during the struggle and the child was pulled clear by her mother, who had reached the bank edge, but not before the child sustained minor lacerations to her lower legs from the initial alligator contact in the shallow water. It's the lack of surface warning that makes me feel like the contact comes from nowhere visible at all. A nearby resident entered the water up to his waist, but stopped as the struggle moved farther from shore. He called out, but there was no response. Tremont did not resurface after the initial struggle. The alligator continued movement in the deeper water before withdrawing. The child was pulled clear by her mother and treated for minor lacerations at the scene. Wildlife authorities later located and euthanized the animal in the same pond later that day. Tremont's body was recovered from deeper water several hours later. I can't ignore how it's still the same pond afterward, just with everything slightly further out there than where it started. Medical findings attributed death to drowning following catastrophic traumatic injury to the lower limb, including severe fracture and joint disruption consistent with rotational force, resulting in rapid incapacitation and significant blood loss. Loss of consciousness was considered to have occurred rapidly following the initial bite and immersion. A brief notice appeared in local reporting. The earlier nuisance alligator report remained unresolved at the time of the incident. The family involved relocated from the community within months, and no signage or visible marker was placed at the pond afterward. For the last case, we entered the Daintree lowlands, whether one wrong step doesn't just slow you down, it decides whether you can get back out there at all. It was July 11, 2021, in the southern Daintree lowlands of Queensland, where a dense rainforest canopy blocks the pre-dawn light and low marsh terrain shifts unpredictably between solid ground and waterlogged mud, making depth and stability difficult to judge even at close range. Philan Murtag was 61 years old, a retired secondary school science teacher from Cairns who, after retirement, turned to structured birdwatching, keeping detailed field journals, and following regional wildlife networks with a kind of methodical discipline. He was widowed and lived alone, kept careful routines, but had developed a habit of entering restricted pre-dawn access areas, treating them more like informal observation time than actual rule violations. He entered the southern Daintree wetland zone through an informal fence gap near Baird Road, moving with a dim headlamp toward a familiar observation platform. In near total darkness under dense canopy, he drifted off the main track into a lower, saturated depression where the ground dropped below path level, turning firm-looking terrain into unstable mud and hidden water pockets. minutes. At first light, he lost his footing in soft ground, and his headlamp shifted out of position and fell into the leaf litter. He paused to recover it in low visibility, and when he stood again, he found himself in a shallow basin surrounded by dense pandanus, where sight lines were broken into narrow gaps and sound carried unevenly through the vegetation. I can almost picture how disorienting it is when the light of source itself drops into the ground and you lose your reference point. A low, heavy, booming call came from ahead, and he raised the light to investigate. In the narrow beam, he revealed a female cassowary at close range, with juveniles partially visible behind her in the undergrowth. He had entered a defended nesting area with no visible boundary markers. The southern cassowary is widely documented as the most dangerous bird in the world, and that designation is a matter of anatomy rather than temperament. The inner toe of each foot carries a dagger-shaped claw that can reach 12 centimeters in length, rigid, forward-pointing, and capable of opening deep tissue in a single downward driving strike, with enough penetrating force to reach the abdominal cavity when aimed at the torso. He froze, then began stepping backward through unstable mud. Investigators believe the cassowary charged after a short period of stillness, covering the distance rapidly. Based on the pattern of injuries, several kicks caused extensive lacerations to the legs and torso, with blunt force consistent with repeated strike impact. Responders found him conscious but immobile on the ground, some distance from the point of contact, with what appeared to be deep lacerations and injuries to his midsection that restricted movement and breathing. There is something almost procedural about how the scene ends for the animal before it ends for him. Phelan stayed conscious for a short time after the attack. He couldn't stand or bear full weight, but he used his right arm to slowly pull himself back toward the raised track, dragging through the mud until he reached firmer ground. From there, he managed to call emergency services and give them his location, which helped responders reach him within about an hour, despite the difficult terrain. He was transported to a regional hospital in Cairns in critical condition with multiple deep lacerations, fractured ribs, and a penetrating abdominal wound. Surgical intervention was performed, but he died shortly after arrival due to hemorrhagic shock secondary to severe internal trauma sustained in the field. Even with the hospital care, the reality is the damage was already structurally too deep to reverse. Emergency responders reached him within the hour following a coordinated remote area extraction despite limited access through saturated wetland terrain and dense vegetation.